Distinguished General Lecture Series. Today, I'm delighted to introduce Maria Falikman, who is a doctor, PhD in psychology, and worked for many years at Moscow State University and in the Department of Theoretical and Applied Linguistics. And Professor Falikman also served as the head of the School of Psychology at the Higher School of Economics in Moscow from 2017 to 2021. And she has a wide range of publications. You can find those online. I'm not going to waste your time talking about those. You can look into that. She'll tell us about some of that. I did want to mention one thing, which is that she is a big fan of summer schools. And says that one of the most important milestones in her career was the cognitive science summer schools in Bulgaria in the 1990s, were organized by the Central and East European Center for Cognitive Science. And she characterizes herself as a researcher who's trying to bridge cognitive and cultural historical approaches to various phenomena, which requires translation of ideas and principles, which is somewhat related to another interest of hers, which is poetry translation, which I think she may or may not talk about today. What she is going to talk to us about today is joint attention and gaze cueing in communication, collaboration, and cognitive development. So please welcome Maria Falikman, which you can do like this or like this.
Hello, everyone. It's an honor for me to lecture here. And may I start sharing my slides? Go. Okay, I hope you can see everything. And I can see some of you, which is also really nice. And well, let's start. I'll be talking today about joint attention, which is our unique ability to look where someone else is looking, to locate the focus of attention, the focus of interest of another person. Joint attention can be observed in many modalities, but what I will be talking about today is visual joint attention. It will be about our ability to follow the gaze of the other person, like we follow the gaze of these nice angels, and discover that they are watching the Virgin, and that's our first reaction to the human eye. And in fact, the first question which emerges in this relation is, what is special about the human eye? What is special about how it looks like? Let's take a closer look at it. Our eyes have an oblongated shape and a contrast between the white sclera, the white part of the eye, and the dark iris, which corresponds to the gaze direction. And in fact, humans are probably the only animals that possess this contrast. Why so? Probably it is evolutionary beneficial because the human gaze plays a very special role in our interaction and in our understanding of what the other people are thinking about, what they are looking for. For example, you see a person gazing somewhere at an announcement and you direct your gaze there immediately, not even thinking about it, just automatically. And Michael Tomasello even proposed the so-called cooperative eye hypothesis, emphasizing that the shape of the human eye evolved in such a way to prompt human interaction, to prompt the interaction of two people, of a child and an adult, or two adults or two children, about the common object of interest, the common focus of attention. In fact, we can see this evolutionary trend even in apes. For example, in a recent study, it has been shown that in gorillas, we could often observe a partial sclera depigmentation, white color of the sclera, and 7% of the gorillas are just like humans. They have this contrast between sclera and iris, allowing to detect the gaze direction. However, the apes cannot just follow gaze direction like we. They can follow it only when the head is turned in the direction of the object of interest. Whereas humans can use the other person's gaze direction as a cue towards important, necessary, or just interesting information. And in fact, our gaze could be considered as a tool of interaction and as a tool of education. And this links us to the cultural historical approach in psychology proposed by Lev Vygotsky almost a century ago. For Vygotsky, a child's development was considered as acquisition of cultural experience through the interaction with caregivers, parents, or so-called knowledgeable others, those who has already learned to use culture, its tools, for example, science, words, whatever. And Vygotsky believed that the acquisition of culture happens through so-called shared cognitive functions or interpsychic or interpsychological functions divided between a child who just enters a culture and a knowledgeable other, with an adult sharing cultural tools or specific ways to interact with the environment to the child. For example, Vygotsky organized a couple of series of experiments. Probably the most famous experiment was about memory and mnemonics as memory tools. But today, I'll say a couple of words about another experiment also organized by Vygotsky together with Alexei Leontiev, the future author of the theory of activity. What they did, they tried to show how attention of a child, which is natural by birth, for example, we turn head to a loud noise or to a flash or whatever, and this works without any intention, but Vygotsky tries to understand how attention could be put under the control, how we could use tools to organize attention to make it a cultural function. Leontiev, guided by Vygotsky's cultural historical approach, runs a very simple experiment. He plays with children starting from like 2 to 5 years old. A very simple game. The experimenter takes 2 bowls. One of the bowls contains a nut, a real nut, and both bowls are covered with lids. And a child has to guess where the nut is. If the guess is correct, then the child receives a nut. If the guess is incorrect, a child loses a nut. And of course, it's a very random game. Sometimes kids win, sometimes they lose and cry and feel really sad. But there is a trick. On both lids, there are small rectangular marks. One is darker, one is lighter. And the nut is always under the lid, where there is a darker mark. However, no one pays attention to the marks. They are really tiny. So it's necessary to somehow introduce this tool to organize attention. And at a certain point, the experimenter shows both cups, both bowls to the kid, puts a nut in one of them, covers both bowls with lids, and points to a mark, to a darker mark. At this moment, a child of 4 or 5 year old starts weaning all the time. 2 or 3 year olds are too young. They continue playing randomly. It's not within their so-called zone of proximal development, where this cultural tool still cannot help them to solve the problem, to win. But 5 year olds win all the time. Why so? They now know where to look. The point and gesture was used as a cultural tool to establish this shared or joint focus of attention. However, if it's not a competition, a game, but a cooperation, a gaze would have been enough to do the same job. And it's exactly what our joint attention is about. It's an interpsychological, a shared function, which includes a set of skills, such as to disengage from our previous focus of attention and follow another person's gaze, to use the other person's gaze to find some useful information and to receive new knowledge, to follow a point and gesture and to use the point and gesture to control someone else's attention, and finally to reveal what makes the other person, for example, happy or sad, what this person considers right or wrong, or so-called social referencing. Well, if we take a closer look of this set of skills, we'll see that in fact there are two groups of skills here. One of them is the ability to react to joint attention, to pay your attention to someone else's object of attention. And the other one is to initiate joint attention, to make someone else pay attention where you want it to be paid. And these two functions are currently in the focus of interest of a lot of psychologists, neuroscientists, educators, and so forth. Actually, probably the very first study of joint attention was run by a famous cognitive psychologist, Jerome Bruner, and his student Michael Scaife back in the 1970s. They studied many babies aged from 2 to 14 months and discovered that by the age of 12 months or 1 year, all typically developing babies can locate a caregiver's object of attention. So it's a very early ability which allows us to understand where someone else is looking. But in fact, if we take a closer look to this ability, we'll distinguish a couple of important steps within it. This was done by George Butterworth in 1990s, and Butterworth distinguished 3 stages in the development of joint attention. The first stage, which he called ecological, is an ability to look in the direction where someone else, here probably the caregiver, is looking. But if there is another object on the way, a baby can just stop there and take this object for the real focus of attention of an adult. At the second stage, which is about 9 to 12 months old, which is called the geometrical stage, the baby locates the focus of attention of the adult really precisely, as if making a geometrical calculation of the angle at which the adult is looking to the object of attention. Finally, at the age of 1.5 years, a baby can locate an object of attention which is located beyond its field of his or her field of view. At the geometrical stage, it's possible to find the focus of attention only within the view field. But at the representation of the third stage, it's possible for a child to turn back if the adult is looking there and to find what's going on behind the back. What's interesting, the geometrical stage or the geometrical behavior observed at this stage is believed to be a mechanism of the early language development as well as of the social emotional development. Why so? Let's imagine a very typical, a very simple situation when a baby and a mom are on the street, and mom looks somewhere and says, "Wow, a cat," or like, "Wow, a fox," and the baby locates the object of attention of an adult and links this tool, this cultural sign, this word to an object. Now the object is labeled, and it is labeled because of the shared focus of attention. It's almost the same about social referencing. For example, the mom looks somewhere and smiles, and the baby looks in the same direction and says like a very funny puppy or a very funny old lady or whoever else, and thinks that this might be funny or something like that. So establishing the common focus of attention helps us to learn more about the culture we are in and to learn more and more and more words when it is important to learn them. And basically, when psychologists try to study how joint attention works, they usually reduce it to some very simple forms, which could be labeled gaze cueing. Usually in the psychology of attention, when we use a variety of cueing paradigms, we show where, for example, a target object, a target stimulus, which requires a speeded reaction will appear. For example, we can use an arrow to show that it will be there or there, and then show a little star to the left or to the right, and ask our participant to push a button as soon as possible when the target star appears. And sometimes we can make this arrow valid, showing in the direction of the target, and sometimes we can make it invalid, showing in an opposite direction, and we can compare whether the response will be faster when the arrow shows in the correct direction, and whether it will be slow, and it will be slow if an arrow shows in an incorrect direction. And what could be done in the study of the mechanisms of joint attention is that we can just replace an arrow with, like, human face with eyes looking to the left or to the right, or schematic drawing like shown in this slide, watching to the left or to the right and guiding our attention in this or that direction. And if we show like this small star after the gaze, we'll discover that gaze cues work much faster than arrow cues. And it seems that they work more reflectory than voluntarily. For example, if we make half of our cues correct or valid and half of our cues invalid, our participant will not just use arrows, but will still follow the gaze. And that's exactly what magicians use in their job. They misdirect our attention using gaze, and we know that we should not follow the gaze of a magician when he or she does her tricks. And we still follow the gaze, and the most interesting things still happen somewhere where we are not looking, because we make this reflectory shift of our attention in the direction of the gaze. What's probably the same technique has been used in fine art for ages. For example, this is a very old painting by an unknown author from a fine arts gallery in Basel. Unfortunately, it's too small here on this slide, but the first thing the viewer sees in this picture contrast eyes of Joseph, and we follow his gaze direction, and we see the eyes of the Virgin, and we follow her gaze direction, and we finally land at the focus of interest for the artist, the baby Christ. And actually, the gaze direction and redirection, gaze cueing, might even change the meaning of the whole painting or some other work of arts. And I really love to show these two versions of the binding of Isaac. Of course, you know this famous story of Abraham, who had to sacrifice his son to the god, and he almost did it. And at the very beginning of the 15th century, there was a grand competition for the gate of the St. John Baptistery in Florence, and there were 7 versions of this binding of Isaac proposed for this competition, and 2 of them survived. And well, they differ in many details. One of them was created by the future famous architect Filippo Brunelleschi, the other one by Lorenzo Ghiberti, who was the winner of the competition after all. But probably the most important thing here is the gaze direction of Abraham. Look to the left, look to Brunelleschi. His Abraham watches on the angel, not to the face of his son, which he turns somewhere else. So Brunelleschi's story, Brunelleschi's binding of Isaac, is a story between the father and the God, the angel. And look at Ghiberti's solution. His Abraham looks directly on Isaac, and the angel is somewhere else. So it's the story between the father and the son. And using the gaze direction, the sculptor prompts this or that understanding of the whole story and of its context. And in fact, what's important in human gaze cueing, the contents might be even more important than geometry. I really like the study of the unfortunately late researcher from St. Petersburg State University, Mikhail Zotov, who demonstrated that the understanding of what's going on does contribute to the establishing of the focus of joint attention. In his study, the participants had to locate the object of attention of a hero of a visual scene. Here, the participants were demonstrated like a dynamic cue with a person looking somewhere, and they had to shift their eyes to where this person was looking. What's interesting, half of the participants watched just this dynamic cue and the final static scene. And the other half of the participants had a chance to watch a very short, like 20 to 40 seconds video of what was going on before this scene. Here it is a small fragment from the Mr. Bean film, with the hero confusing the discount card, which was the focus of attention of this person here. And it was discovered that showing this 20-second record was extremely efficient in guiding the participants' attention towards the object of attention, the hero. So the context does contribute to joint attention together with the gaze direction itself. And actually, it's really important also what we know about the person who provides the gaze. In one of our studies, we showed this avatar to our participants, also with very contrast eyes, as you can see. And he could look to the right, to the left, and the participant's task was to press the button, a virtual reality button, as soon as possible when one of the balls to the right or to the left lit up. Actually, what was interesting was that we told to the half of our participants that this avatar was an assistant for navigation in the virtual reality environment, and the other half of our participants was instructed that this guy was an assessment specialist who would assess their intelligence, reaction time, and whatever, and will be used by HR services to evaluate specialists, to evaluate candidates. And we expected to find differences in how gaze cue worked under these two instructions. And we did find these differences. For example, when the avatar was introduced as an assistant, he provided for a faster response after a valid cue. But probably the most dramatic result was that if this avatar provided an invalid cue, for example, looked to the right and the target flash was to the left, the slowdown was even more pronounced if we trust a person and he gives us a wrong gaze cue. This might have really dramatic consequences, whereas when this guy was introduced as an assessment specialist, the difference was not that drastic. And actually, this corresponds to the results of Italian researchers who also demonstrated that the gaze direction of a potentially dangerous person could be revealed faster than a gaze direction of a neutral person. And all these results are in close correspondence to the general idea that we tend to attribute certain characteristics, certain ideas to the person who gives a cue, and this attribution of intentions or even of the ability to have mental states might matter. For example, I really like a study by Japanese authors who used pareidolia images, these images which are not faces, like your cappuccino cup looking at you, or like face on the moon, or I really love this, berries also looking in a certain direction. And they use these pareidolia images to cause a gaze skewing effect. But they demonstrated that this effect only emerged when participants subjectively experienced pareidolia. If not, there was no gaze skewing effect from these, from images like this. And well, this conclusion is further supported by this 9 2x2 design study by German-Polish team by Eva Wiese. In their study, they compared gaze cues and gaze skewing effects, but they also instructed half of their participants who watched the face that it was either a human face or a mannequin face, and they instructed half of their participants who watched the robot face that it was an automatic robot or a human-controlled robot, with a human moving the robot's eyes to the left or to the right. And what they discovered, that there was a gaze skewing, a joint attention effect from a human face and from a human-controlled robot, but not from a mannequin face and not from an autonomous robot. But this result is a little bit contradictory if we remember about the cooperative eye hypothesis and the importance of the contrast between sclera and the iris. And this forced us to make yet another study in which we tried to compare directly the contribution of the contrast and the context to the gaze skewing effect. To do that, we compared gaze skewing from human faces with the pronounced contrast between iris and sclera, and the same eyes embedded in objects, as you can see here. And to confuse our participants a little bit, we mixed objects with eyes and objects with no eyes. And in this study, which was performed by my student, Tatiana Shevel, who received her bachelor's honors diploma today in the morning, actually, we did receive a gaze skewing effect from objects with eyes. But that was a smaller effect, and it was different from the effect which we obtained from real faces. Because for real faces, we received a benefit when the face is watching in the direction of the target, and no cost when the guest watched in the opposite, the person watched in an opposite direction. And for objects, we found both costs and benefits, which means that probably our participants were using this contrast as a tool rather than just automatically reacted to the direction of the gaze, although not all of them actually noticed eyes embedded in the objects. And still it's possible to obtain the gaze skewing just from the contrast, not from the context of the human face to which we attribute mental states. But this was all about our ability to react to joint attention. And what about initiating joint attention, which is probably even more important in the interaction, cooperation, and education. And a very famous neurolinguist, Elizabeth Bates, also back in 1970s, distinguished also two stages in the development of the ability to initiate joint attention. The first stage was titled the proto-imperative pointing. And at this stage, a child tries to attract the adult's attention to a certain object just to reach this object. So the object of attention, the object of interest is a real goal of a child at this stage, is give it to me. And the adult is used, as a means to reach to something unreachable. But at the second stage, the situation drastically changes. It is called the proto-declarative pointing. And in fact, at this stage, a child just wants to involve an adult into interaction. And an object of interest is used just as a means to share experience or emotions or impressions with an adult. So proto-imperative pointing is about getting something using an adult, and proto-declarative pointing is about involving an adult in an interaction around a certain object, which is an object of joint attention. But if we have these two seemingly separate ability to react to joint attention and to initiate joint attention, how could we answer a question whether there is something in common between them? Whether it is possible to link these two abilities somehow. An attempt to answer this question was made in a neuroimaging and fMRI study of the mechanism of initiating joint attention and reacting to joint attention in the brain. In a study by Elizabeth Redke, also performed 10 years ago, participants in a scanner were solving two kinds of tasks. In the initiating joint attention tasks, they had to show another person where a mouse on the screen is, and it could be in any of the four corners. So the participants had to look in the direction of the mouse, drawing the other person's attention there. And in the reacting to joint attention task, the task was to follow the other person's gaze to find the mouse on the screen. And as a result of this study, there were some areas of activation revealed. Some were specific for initiating joint attention, they are showed in yellow, and some were specific to responding to joint attention. And if we look at the intersection, the green areas, we will discover that they really well match to the so-called mirror system of the human brain. The superior temporal sulcus, the inferior frontal gyrus, the system which was described by Giacomo Rizzolatti as a mechanism of imitation. That's why it's called the mirror system, the system which allows us to do what other people do. But also, it was described as a system of understanding of the other person's purposeful actions and emotions. And actually, this role of the human mirror system allowed another famous neuroscientist Valeria Ramachandran call mirror neurons in the human brain the neurons that shaped civilization. Why so? Because basically the mirror system was considered as a system which allows us to understand what other people are doing and what other people are thinking of. And the further research revealed that joint attention plays the crucial role in what psychologists call the theory of mind, the understanding of what's going in the other person's head. For example, imagine a very simple situation. Somebody comes to visit you, you propose your guest a cup of tea. Well, it's not tea here on the picture, but anyway. And the guest is looking at his cup of tea, which is already empty, and you follow your guest's gaze that this person thinks that he would like another cup of tea. And actually, this understanding of what the other person is thinking about and understanding the other person's intentions forms the basis of the so-called shared intentionality, which Mike Tomasello considers a human species specific feature. The ability to share intentions, in fact, is the basis for our cooperative behavior. We can cooperate only if we understand the intentions of the other person, and only if we share intentions, and only if we are ready to share information that would support this communication. And joint attention is a very simple geometrical basis of this ability. But let's imagine what happens if this ability to look where someone else is looking is knocked out. Actually, we'll see the developmental cascade that corresponds to autistic spectrum disorders. And in fact, the research shows that almost 90% of children with autistic spectrum disorders do demonstrate joint attention deficits. And if we compare them to other developmental disorders, and these causes, of course, early language delays, because the child does not locate objects being named by his or her caregivers, and this causes problems with social and emotional development, which are well described for autistic spectrum disorders children. And actually, the first question which emerges here is what is difficult for these kids? Because the answer to this question opens opportunities for their rehabilitation, and joint attention as a key deficit is a very, very important object of intervention in the rehabilitation work with kids with autistic spectrum disorders. And it would be natural to suggest that the border happens between reacting to joint attention and initiating joint attention. But that's not the case. In fact, it's quite easy to teach an autistic kid to react to joint attention. And in fact, it's quite easy for an autistic kid to learn proto-imperative pointing. They do show something to an adult when they do want this or that object. But it's really difficult to teach an autistic kid proto-declarative pointing. That's why the most intervention programs not only train joint attention skills, but also try to form a social motivation, a motivation of information sharing and understanding of an adult as a generalized reinforcement source. And actually, what's interesting, in such intervention program, lots of robots are used, and these robots are firstly developed like 20 years ago by Japanese researchers, by Hideki Kazima group, are able to direct their attention to the object of attention of a child. And if a child is resistant about, interacting with an adult, while interacting with a robot, which can pay attention to a child's object of attention or react to joint attention, and which can also initiate joint attention, for example, or turning the gaze towards something new or interesting. Such robots turned out to be extremely efficient in the rehabilitation of autistic kids with joint attention deficits. And there is another really interesting and important recent research area about joint attention, which is education. And in fact, education is normally based on joint attention, on sharing the focus of attention between a student and an expert, a student and a teacher, and lots of practical skills based on joint attention, like learning to repair something, or medical education, but it's much more difficult to catch such things when looking at some abstract school subjects like math. And here, what we can do, and for example, what Anna Schwartz from Utrecht University does, what could be used as a dual eye tracking technology. When we track the gaze direction of a student and the teacher using eye trackers and try to match them. And here we see what happens when a student solves a certain math problem about triangles, and it's a sensory motor problem because a student has to move the corners of the triangle to obtain a pre-specified shape with pre-specified characteristics. And what we see when analyzing eye movements of a teacher and the students is that the synchronization of their gazes, which could not be observed from outside but could be tracked by the devices, is really precise, like at least 17 milliseconds. And the student, as it follows the teacher's gaze leads the gaze of a student and creates basically Vygotsky microzone of proximal development, creates the zone where the student has to learn something, to acquire some knowledge, and the student goes in the direction of the teacher's gaze. But if it happens that the student loses the teacher's focus of attention. In the behavior, we see problems with comprehension of the teacher's explanations. So the gaze is crucial, but these studies are really new, and we are looking forward to some further results demonstrating how this joint focus of attention can contribute to the study of math. But the other very important research area which emerges right now, which I called the applied joint attention, is about avatars and virtual agents in education, business, and even psychological counseling. Of course, everybody has already forgotten about this silly clipper, first abandoned by Microsoft employee, as everybody knows, employees, as everybody knows. But now, as the virtual reality and navigation in virtual reality becomes a part of our life, the studies of joint attention in virtual reality become really of importance. And I hope that soon we'll see how the results of these studies will contribute to the development of better instruments, of better guide in the solution of problems which emerge in the interaction with virtual reality. I'd like to thank you for your attention, and I saw many questions in the chat, and I hope I'll be able to answer at least some of them. Thank you very much, and I'll start reading the questions, I think, yeah?
Thank you so much. That's great. Yes, let's see if some people would like to raise their hand and ask their question that way.
So,
And then if they don't, then we'll go to the ones written in the chat. How about that? Yeah, let's do that. So would somebody like to make a comment or a question?
That was really interesting. Thank you so much. That's not a question, but just thanks.
Thank you. I see a raised hand.
Yeah, Michelle.
Hello, sorry I can't turn my camera on, but I wanted to ask what would be the role of this joint gaze in the teaching process for the teacher rather than the student, if there's research on that, like in more detail. And thank you.
In fact, from the same studies in math education, we already know that it is important for the teacher to catch up the student's gaze when the student is lost. So basically, the teacher has to be sensitive to the student's gaze, especially if they have this, common field in which they interact, because when the teacher interacts with the whole class, of course, it's important to just monitor where the students are looking and who of them is distracted, who is not, but it's not about the objects of attention. But when it is one-to-one interaction about something, it is really important that the teacher, not only the student monitors the teacher's gaze, but also the teacher monitors the student's gaze. And it is as important as to monitor the baby's gaze for the mother, because what I discovered on YouTube that recently lots of small educational videos appeared instructing young mothers to monitor their child's gaze to engage into common activities, to engage into interaction around an object of interest of a child, of a baby, which is important to teach baby to engage an adult in a similar way. That's what the proto-declarative pointing by Elizabeth Bates about.
Thank you.
Other comments or questions? Nicole?
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for the talk. It was very, very instructive. There was something I was wondering. I read a study. Now, I can't really track it because it was a couple of years ago. It was an article more than a study claiming that there are more and more children showing sign of autistic spectrum disorders, and that and this article claimed that it was influenced by the amount of screen time, and especially by the fact that in some cartoons for children, this fact of representing the gaze and where the object is located could be influencing that. I was wondering if that is something you would agree with, or if there is some study about it or something along those lines.
Well, actually, it sounds a little bit bizarre to me as it is. Well, maybe, well, you could just provide more details why it could be so. Don't you remember from that study? Actually, what we do know about the autistic spectrum disorders basics, that it's in fact an umbrella term which covers lots of variety of different deficits, and there are high functional autistic kids which are sometimes even indistinguishable from typically developing kids if intervention was timely and rehabilitation was efficient, and some low functioning kids which have a mental retardation, but this joint attention deficit is in fact common for them, for most of them, I would say. And the reacting to joint attention part could be, as I told, easily trained. Initiation of joint attention suffers much more. And as for the brain mechanisms, it was believed, like even 15 years ago, that autistic kids have a problem with their mirror system. But after all, that turned out to be not the case. But now another model is more popular, so-called STORM model, top-down modulation model, which says that what suffers in autistic spectrum disorders is not the mirror system itself, but top-down modulation of mirror system, sensitive to social interaction, instruction, and cultural experience. So what has not been formed is the ability to modulate the work of our mirror system.
Thank you. Luba?
Thank you so much. I wanted to ask, what came to my mind. I see that this idea of a gaze can be and is used in art and in teaching and in different forms of communication. My idea was, does it have the potential to be used, and probably is, I just maybe didn't thought about it, in posters and in city environment, urban environment, when you have to get the attention of a person for some important information, for example, some social ads or like political posters and something like that.
Well, I haven't heard about it, but well, it's an interesting question. But in fact, it's really a powerful tool, and if they use it, maybe it will grab even more attention. That the real urban environment needs. I just don't know because, well, actually, it is used by pickpockets, that's for sure. For gas redirection, it's used by people showing magic tricks, and if it is used also by politicians, well, I don't know how we will survive in this environment. But it's a good question.
Thank you.
Yes,
Nina.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to comment on that because I actually read the studies about how not joint attention, but visual attention is grabbed by PR and all those stuff. So yes, it is used. How to influence your attention, but it's not very good so far. People are mainly using very basic eye tracking techniques to try and try out some people, so they don't really know much of the information and they don't go into really scientific stuff of it. And about the joint attention per se, it's more like when you have a poster or something involving other people, or I don't know, animals on it, or any cartoon character on it. Usually I think it is involved there, but for people who devise those placards and so on, it's more subconscious. So they use it, but they don't really know that they use it. So yeah, that's a nice area to expand on as well.
Thank you. There's some comments. There's some comments in the chat.
Well, actually,
Yeah.
there was a long comment about the uncanny valley phenomenon there, which did not contain a question, and there was a good comment that joint attention does suffer in the online education. It still suffers, but maybe some new tools will be introduced that would allow for following the gaze of a teacher. For example, when eye trackers are built in every computer, and we can know the gaze direction of a person we're communicating with, this problem could be solved, I think. And well, yes, team teaching. A question from Distria. Has the deficit that you mentioned in ASD, for example, led to stereotyping in regards to shared intentionality and knowledge of the child or person? I do not know whether we could speak about stereotyping here. Probably the most common stereotype about the autistic spectrum disorder is the so-called gaze aversion, that people with autism don't like looking directly in the eyes of the other person. But the recent research from a couple of years ago shows that it's probably rather a gaze indifference, not a gaze diversion, gaze aversion, because when the researchers compared the reaction of autistic and typically developing children to faces and other objects, they discovered that typically developing children just pay more attention to faces with eyes, and autistic children paid equal attention to faces and objects. And what's also interesting for typically developing children, eyes and arrows as cues work differently. just as I explained during the lecture. And for autistic people, eyes work exactly as arrows. If there are more valid than invalid cues, autistic people do follow the cue, and they are random when the proportion of valid and invalid cues are equal. They do not follow either gaze or an arrow. And we do follow, typically developing people do follow both, do follow the gaze cue, even if this cue is random. So it seems to be an evolutionary mechanism which is being somehow disturbed in autistic spectrum disorders.
Thank you. Other comments, questions?
A comment from Alexander.
Yeah. Mhm.
Well, yeah, exactly. It's we seem to be unique because human evolution is about cooperation. It's about an ability to do something together and to communicate goals and intentions. And it's the point where language and joint action come together. And joint attention seems to play a very important, maybe even a crucial role in this interaction and thus in evolution. And also, it's interesting, yes, if you're looking directly in the eye while speaking to someone, this person will decide that you are rude or hiding something. Well, I wouldn't say so. But in fact, we always keep in mind monitoring the gaze of the others, and we keep in mind that they monitor our gaze direction. Just a couple of weeks ago in 2025, a new study from Canada appeared in which the participants wore dark glasses. Half of the participants wear dark glasses, half of the participants wear just normal glasses, and their gaze was monitored anyway. And they looked at a variety of pictures, and among them there were some sexual pictures, and those with dark glasses who believed that their gaze was covered looked at sexual pictures longer and more often than those who didn't know that. So we always keep in mind that the other person might follow our gaze. And of course, we don't think that the researchers will monitor our gaze when we believe that our gaze is hidden.
I want to clarify that I meant the example, as for example, you have two children and somebody ate all the candy, and you ask them in a severe tone, so who ate all the candy? And Jack looks directly in your eye, and Bob tries to look away, and so that is how humans sometimes suppose that, okay, so that is Bob who ate all the candy, because he doesn't want to look me directly in the eye.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a good comment.
Other comments and questions? We will keep a copy of the chat box in case anything got missed, and we can, if we can post your slides for the students who couldn't come today. Sorry, I have a truck passing by, and we can post the slides in the chat box, and possibly a copy of the talk itself if we have a recording. If that's okay. Thank you everyone for coming. And let's thank our speaker one more time. Thank you, Maria.
Thank you for your attention.
Thank you.
See you all tomorrow.